Okay, hi everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. If at another side of the world and you're watching us here, hope we are all doing well. So we are starting the career panel on Android now. Want to get the document. Sorry. Jesus. Oh boy. Sorry, give me a minute, please. Jesus Christ. Sorry.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm super excited to welcome you to the Android Development Career Panel. With me here, I have three amazing panelists with me that have joined us today. And I will just first take the mic around to first do a quick introduction, and then we'll just deep dive into the questions that we have for today. Sorry about the network problems. So I'll first start I'll start with Eric, then we'll take Beatrice, then we'll go to Aaron. So Eric, how are you today? Can you do a brief introduction?
Hello everyone. So hope you guys are doing great. So my name is Eric. So I'm super excited to be here today with all of you. So yeah, like I've said, my name is Eric. I'm a Google developer expert for Android. So I'm really into Android development, and currently I'm working as a senior mobile developer at Lotify. Yeah, that's is basically it for my small presentation.
Thank you, Eric. Hi, Beatrice. Super excited to have you join us here today.
Awesome. So my name is Beatrice Kenya. I am an Android engineer. I started doing Android in Campus. Yes, that's what I liked among the so many other things we learned. Never turned back. Yeah, I'm an Android engineer at Kiosk Digital. That's why I write code. Besides that, I am an Android author at Codeco. So creating content for Android and having fun. Yeah, so that's it about me. Yeah, over to you, Aaron.
Thank you, Beatrice. Aaron.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm Harun Ongereka. Super excited to be here as well. I'm a Google developer expert for Android. Currently working at Apollo Agriculture as an Android engineer, and also on the same team as Beatrice on the Codeco, writing articles and also creating some video courses there. And that's all about me. Happy to share and learn as well.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for joining. And I would like to really deep dive into it. Please, in the chat, let me know where you are joining us from. And if you have questions, also please send it in the chat. I'll be able to pick and ask the speakers the questions. I have some questions I have highlighted first. And the first of them is so what are some of the important features and functionalities that every developer should consider or should know about? Because I really want us to jump into it and see what are the most important features that I'm an Android developer, what are the things I should take note of? So I'll start from Eric, then I'll go to Beatrice.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. So the most of the time when you are building an Android application, so the key important thing is the fact that your application is supposed to build on top of an architecture. I think that is the most important thing because the architecture will define how fast and how your application will grow. Because when it comes to software engineer, something that is really, really constant is the change, right? The customer plan or the customer's needs can change over time. And if you have decided to start your application using the right architecture, you can be assured that you'll be very comfortable for a very long time. I think for me, that is a very important key feature, if I can say like that. That's you may consider when starting building your mobile application.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. Beatrice.
Yeah, still building on the architecture part, and we are Android engineers. I think most, if not all, Android apps support an offline fast approach so that now your users are able to use your app even when they lose internet or something like that. So I think that is one of these many things to learn. Learn about how to store that data in the app. Also learn how to get data the from a network API, from a remote API, then they're connected back to internet, and also how to sync the data. Because most of the time you're just dealing with data all the time. So that you look at now things like room for storage, work manager for scheduling tasks, and syncing data, among many other things. Retrofit or cater for network calls. Yeah, so basically an offline approach when working on an Android app. Yeah. Aaron, have something to say?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And I hope you are taking notes as they are sharing these insights. Harun, so what are the most important features, in your own opinion, or functionality that every Android developer should take note of?
Yeah, so I think for me, Android being like a Android facing or maybe user facing sort of development, I think the most important thing is the UI side of things, and also how to know how to develop apps that are functional and also users are going to use them and not face into weird issues as well. So over the time, I think you'll learn a bit of architecture, a bit of maybe saving to local storage and all that. But at the end of the day, people who are going to use your app, so most of the times are not even technical people. So you have to know how to represent the UI in a way that people can use it and in a way that someone cannot get stuck. So that is usually like a very important part. So above everything else, try to make sure that your app is working and also people can be able to use that and be able to get from one point to the other without them being stuck or without them needing your explanation on something like that. So for me, that has been very keen. And also as I'm developing, I think I try to make sure that the app is really functioning and try to use the different things to support that. Maybe in case of errors, try to catch them gracefully and not maybe crash the app or maybe do something that isn't understandable to the user. Yeah, so that would be all from me.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And it's also always important to do things that the users will understand. But I want us to tweak this chat a little bit and talk about security. Because I know that in the time of today, a lot of people, security is at the forefront of whatever conversation that is coming up, whether you are developing an app or in terms of how to make sure that your apps are secure, whatever calls you are making, whatever data that your customer data is secure. So, what are some of the key security considerations that you look at when you are sort of like developing Android apps? And how can other developers that are learning from you today secure their apps? I think I'll switch it a bit. I'll start from Aaron, then I'll go to Beatrice, then I'll go to Eric.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So for security, normally I think we have like a number of things to consider. So number one is trying to make sure that the API is secure. I think the backend team normally uses like token authentication. So if you have all the APIs have to be like authenticated so that even if someone else tries to make like a request to your API or maybe your backend, I think they cannot be able to get that. So I think that is usually like the first layer. We also have like a number of things that you can do like in your app. For example, enabling minification of your code so that even if someone does like a reverse engineering of your app, they cannot be able to see whatever you're doing in your app as well. And then also, I think we have some security critical apps, for example, banking apps. I have ever worked in a company that does applications for bank, and then we have things like checking if the device is rooted, or maybe if someone is using like your app on an emulator, and then just disallowing those, because I think either rooted devices and also emulator try to give root access to users so that they can be able to see the storage files in your app and all that. So if the app is very critical at times, it's also good to disable the app from functioning in such environments as well.
Thank you so much for sharing, Aaron. Beatrice.
For me, I think this is not very Android specific, but I think this can cut across. Yeah, like we saying, do not store your API keys in your GitHub repository most of the time. I don't know, find place to store them securely so that when you're pushing your code to GitHub, your people seeing the code will not have access to your API keys for all the APIs you use, map APIs, remote APIs, yeah, all the APIs. That's what I would say. Eric?
Yeah, for me, I would say it's very important to not save sensitive information in such a way that someone who reverse engineering your application can have access to, like Aaron said. And it's also important to, to have a good understanding of some best practices related to security. So you can even have, a secure backend or something like that, but there is some other guideline that is very important to follow in order to be able that your application will keep safe the personal data of your user. That's why it's very important to to take the time to read the privacy guideline that is available on the Android developer documentation website. It's really important to observe those kind of things. So for example, let's say if you're working with a bank application that is supposed to hold a lot of sensitive information, you have just to make sure that you use something like encrypted database or something like that, just to make sure that everything related to sensitive data cannot be exposed in such a way. So because I remember one day, so I was working on an application, and someone called me that I was be able to to get access to the token of your database directly inside your application. So I think that is really, really important to observe those kind of security guideline. I think another thing that is really important is before starting using a new library, because the most of the time when you're starting building your application, we used to use a lot of open source library, and some libraries can introduce some security issues in your application. That's why it's very, very important to have an idea about every kind of library that you are going to use. Otherwise, that can compromise the user, the data of your daily user. Yeah, that's basically my small advice about security on Android.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think that the conversation around security is actually not something that we can run through now, because there's just a lot of things to look at, a lot of things to consider. But definitely, those pointers are good pointers for us to start looking at when we are talking about security. The next question on my list is really, and please, the audience, if you have a question, please put it on the chat. I'm going to be checking the chat shortly, and also be sending the question to the panelists so that they are able to answer the questions. But the next question I have is about testing and debugging. What are some of the tools and techniques that you use to test and debug your Android apps? I think we'll go the other way. Eric, then Beatrice, then Aaron. I think I have a good feeling the way we are switching is keeping everybody on edge.
Yeah, testing is really, really interesting because it's important because testing the most of the time used to be like a self documentation of your application, right? Because when, for example, you are working with it can be a small team or medium team, writing tests can be something that can help you to document your code without having to write an explicit documentation, if I can say like that. So the most of the time testing, like I used to say, it used to be simple in theory, but when it's come to put all those pieces together in practice, it's another story. That's why it's very important to have, some examples. There is a lot of example related to testing on the official documentation related to Android. So you can start something like unit testing. I think that is the most simple task related to test. You can just start starting testing your application. And the real thing that's really important related to test is the fact that if you start writing tests and you notice that it's kind of difficult, in another way I can say that it's mean that your code is not testable, right? As soon as you start writing tests somewhere in your application, let's say you are writing a test, you want to test your repository or your view model, and you notice that it's not that much, it's difficult kind to put all the pieces together in order to test your thing. So I think it's maybe because your code is not testable, right? That's why it's very important to use principle like TDD, because first of all, you will write the test that is supposed to, test a business logic inside your application. And after that, you will write the code that is supposed to, to get the chance to be executed by that test code. I think that is really, really important because when it's come to talk about test, I think TDD can be a great approach. And yeah, that's basically it. I can share about testing. Back to you, Aaron.
Yeah, so I'll maybe talk on mostly debugging, since you've covered like most of what I'll say in testing. And for me, I have like a number of tools to help me, especially debug. So for example, if we are talking about maybe database, I normally use Room, even at work. We have what we call adding like queries or like sort of a debugger to your query. So for example, if you're trying to insert items, you have like a query that sort of like displays on the log card, which is very helpful to know whether your queries are executing or whether you're getting items from the database. So that is number one. And also Logcat is like another very helpful tool if you're trying to debug as well. Try to know a handy tools on how to use the Logcat and the different levels where you can be able to switch between maybe debugging. And then for network calls, I normally have like this app called Chaka. It's a library which installs like a inspector for your all the network calls. So it's normally easy for you, even if you're sharing like test APKs to maybe someone on the team. So once they face like issues, maybe something is not working, they can easily share the network responses and you can easily have a look. Is it Android having a problem or is it backend having a problem? I think many of the times that has been helpful, especially if you're sharing APKs with non-technical people. The other thing is we have, apart from that, we have things like if you're doing like releasing that app to production, because you can no longer deploy an app that has Chaka to the production, it's not like recommended. We have logs where you deploy them to Crashlytics. So for example, we have a crash, you can see the log tree and then be able to understand what is happening before the crash or what was happening before the user faced that issue. So I think those maybe are the few things on top of my mind I can mention that are normally helpful to maybe checking issues on your app and trying to debug. And then if those don't work, we have what we call the line breaker tool, I think on all JetBrains IDEs. So if maybe something is not working, let's say you're making a network call, you are sure everything you've set it up correctly, but no response you're getting and nothing is happening. I think try to use the line breaker. I think it helps you to go line by line and then see which part of your code is breaking and be able to identify issues. Over to you, Beatrice.
Cool. So that's awesome. So I've shared, I mentioned a number of tools. I'll mention something about testing. I think for me, one thing about testing is I can get faster feedback on the code I am working on. I do not have to wait until I run the code on an emulator or if not, I read up whatever platform I am writing code for me to get feedback. So tests allow me to get faster feedback on the code that I'm working on. There are various types of tests. there are unit test, integration test, UI test. The good thing is you can find all this information and guidelines on the on the Android documentation. You can learn about what libraries you can use for either type of test. Yeah, for UI you can use Espresso if you're still writing your code. And I think you don't need that for Compose and so many other libraries. Yeah, a number of them, and very many approaches of writing your test and very many terms like mock, stubs, and all that. You get to understand that when you look at the documentation. And then you write test. Testing is interesting and makes writing your code a little bit faster and easier. Not at the start, but once you get used to writing test, it becomes a little bit faster. Also, I think something I'm missing in my forgetting my end about writing testable code. I think following understanding a bit of solid principles, yeah, and also a good architecture will force you to write code that you can write test for. So again, learn good architecture and understand your architecture. Learn solid principles. Write testable code, and then write test for your code. Then it'll be good to go. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Before I go into the next round of questions that I have, I want to take some questions from the audience. And I have a question from Femi here, who is asking that is storing an API key in Gradle and accessing it with build config secure. What is a better way to do this? I have absolutely no idea what that is, but I think Arun or Beatrice can take that and answer that for Femi. Whichever wants to go first. It's an open floor.
Yeah, I can go first. So it's one of the way of securing how you share the API keys. But the thing is, once you like set it up that way, make sure you ignore the file. So, for example, if you are sharing, you're defining the API key in a local.properties file, make sure the file is ignored and not pushed to the repository if it's a public one. So that it's usually like a recommended way to secure your API key as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I think that there's a next question from Stephen. And I know this question is dicey. For a beginner, what language is made easier for beginners? I think I want Eric to take this.
That's an interesting question. Especially for Android development, the recommended language is probably Kotlin. And the most of the time, the easiest language I can say like that, the most of the time depend of the material that you are using. So if you are using some material, things can be quite complicated. But fortunately, there is a lot of material related to Kotlin and Android development that is available on the official documentation. And if you are planning to do Android development, for me personally, the easiest programming language that you can use right now is Kotlin. And the material that can help you to learn or to getting started with Android development with Kotlin are really, really great. And the code labs and all those stuff, and that can help you to have a smooth learning experience when it comes to start Android development.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Eric, for that answer. So I have this question from Sonny. My Android emulator keeps flickering. When I used to write Android back then, I used to run into this a lot of time, and also takes about 11 gig, which makes the Android Studio drag. What can be done about it? Beatrice, do you want to take this? Hi, Beatrice, can you hear me?
I do. So I'll try this. I'm not sure. So probably you've installed so many apps, and they're big apps and they have a lot of data. Maybe try clearing data may help. Yeah, make the emulator lighter, or if you have a physical device, also it can help. It gives you better results than an emulator.
Yeah, and I think I plus one to that. I think when I used to write Android and I use that sort of device, I get a lot that. So please switch to just use your own device and use a USB to connect to it. It's much better because the emulator eats a lot of RAM and it can use up a lot of space, especially if you are using a 4 gig RAM laptop, there's even no way you would try an emulator. But yeah, so Eric, you're smiling. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because when you start software development, especially in Android, so you'll realize that Android Studio used to be super heavy, and for me personally, I used to use emulator, especially when it's come to run or to test my application on a specific version of Android. So let's say I'm using a device with Android 10, but I want to have an idea about how my application will looks like on, let's say, an higher version or a lower version. In that particular case, I can use the emulator, but I'm not used to the emulator every single time because the most you use the emulator, let's say you are coding for an hour and you're still using the emulator, you will realize that it will take a lot of RAM and it will not be interesting. But if you have a powerful computer, I think the emulator can be quite interesting. But if you don't have a computer with a lot of RAM, I can suggest to use a physical device. That is probably the best choice.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I think I have a question. I have this dicey question. I'm not going to ask it because I think we had a similar question that Aaron answered about what language you should start with. You should start with you're just starting. But I have another interesting question from the same person that is talking about architecture. And I wanted one of the questions I already put down is around architecture because it's an interesting conversation to have because there are different architecture, people like different approaches. But let's first start from the basics here. So I have a project that is involving XML that has just activities, models, and adapters. What architecture is best to classify this under? And why would you go with the architecture? The reason why the why is important is because there are different approaches that you can use, and then you end up at the same right answer. But the reasons justify why exactly you think that that approach is best. So because this is much more broader, I think that we can also now then tie it in. So let me just start from here first. So do Eric first, then Aaron, then Beatrice.
Okay, so basically, when you are working on a project that's involved XML, I think the architect, the official architect that is promoted on the official documentation is MVVM. But for me personally, I would suggest MVI. Why am I saying MVI? Well, because MVI, it's super interesting when it's come to handle states. Because the biggest downside with the MVVM is the fact that you will end up with a lot of states, right, inside your application, and every single state inside your application can evolve independently. And when the complexity of the application grow, testing all those states, all those UI tests in a different way can be tricky. That's why most of the time I used to suggest MVI over MVVM, even though it's depend of how large your project is and what is your use cases. But for me especially, I used to use the MVI because with the MVI, when it's come to model your UI state, you will only use a data class with all the property that will represent every single state of your application, and you can even test the UI change and the UI the test the state of your application quite easily. And why? Another important thing about the MVI is the fact that you are using the XML in your project, but one day you decide to move to Jetpack Compose or something like that. You will don't have too much work to do with the MVI architecture because it can be adapted to Jetpack Compose quite easily, and you will not need to change all stuff related to the view model. And the only thing that you will need to change it will be your UI stuff. And the MVI is quite a good option when it comes to do XML by having a chance or an idea or a plan to move to Compose.
Yeah, maybe to add on what Eric is saying, the more you move, I think, to Compose, the more you start adopting like sort of like an MVI architecture or like a hybrid. This is something that I've witnessed of late because the more you have those states, I think with compose, it becomes worse because if you're observing those states independently, you'll face what we call recomposition even on screens that do not change like the state. So I think that's why it's recommended to sort of have like the MVI approach. But I think for activities, models, and adapter, those are just maybe names for the different components in Android. It's not necessarily like an architecture. And when it comes to choosing architecture, it's usually one of those hot topics and one of the questions where it depends with probably what you want to achieve. And secondly, it depends with the team that you're working on, because if you're joining like a company, most of the times they already have like a project already set up and an architecture already set up. So you don't go start rewriting everything maybe to MVI or MVVM or whatever architecture that you want. So it's usually team dependent, and whichever that you find, I think it's always good to discuss with the team. These are the pros of this architecture. These are the cons, and then just try to weigh which one weighs everything and which one suits the team as well. And the other thing, especially for companies, they try to weigh if we have an architecture, which one will it be easy to onboard future developers at a faster pace? Because if you have like a very complex architecture and people struggle to understand what different parts are doing in the code base, it sort of adds to the whole onboarding period of a developer. So that is usually like a key thing to companies as well. Over to you, Beatrice.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Every time I see a question of architecture, I think the first thing for me, the first thing I should say is understand what each architecture proposes. For instance, we earned MVVM for a while. So MVVM came with architecture components, I suppose. Yeah, because it introduced the view model. So with the view model, sorry, with the view model now it was easy to have fair enough, easy to handle configuration changes in Android, and then we enclave data, and then so other things. But now understanding what each component does in your app, and if that is what you need. Then now from MVVM, now we have MVI. With MVI, it mostly focuses on state. Now understanding what each of those does, the problem each of those say solves. Yeah. Even when you're proposing now an architecture to your team, you can you can easily discuss it with the team, explain to them what value it brings to the team. Also, understanding an architecture and having a good architecture for your app, it helps in evolving the app. Because look, we end review system like the other year, then now we have Jetpack Compose, and companies are like, or rather people are moving their and companies are moving their projects now to Jetpack Compose. For a properly architecture app, migrating would be as because just Jetpack Compose is just the UI, not everything. So just changing a UI. If your app is not properly architected, you may have to rewrite everything from the beginning. So you want to make sure you understand your architecture and write a very good architecture for your app, so that your app is able to evolve over the years. Yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thank you so much for all the different answers and different insights into that. I think the next question is really about going back to the start and where your journey sort of began from. And I think it's always good to look back to sort of know what were some of the things that you did that really helped you in getting to where you are today. So, in your opinion, what were those things that you think that you did that sort of made you to get to this position where you're doing well, you're high flyers in the industry? So I think I'll start from Beatrice this time around. Then I'll do Eric. Then I'll do Aaron.
Awesome. So one of the things that has worked for me over my time, and one thing I'll tell everyone is figure out what works for you. Yes, figure out what works for you. Because there's a way I learn things, there's a way Aaron learns things, there's a way Eric learns things. So knowing my style makes me learn faster. Yes, and of course, learn more things than I would if I copied someone else's learning style. Not just for learning, just even how you manage your time. Yeah, because we have like different time schedules, we have different things we're worrying about. So figure out what works for you. And then something Aaron keeps saying, I know you will say this, be consistent, especially when you're learning and even when you're developing and all that, be consistent. Yes, consistent because again, you're building a skill. Yes, and you cannot learn a skill in a single day. So you want to be consistently practicing so that you can keep getting better and being patient when you're learning because you can't learn everything on a single day. Yeah, so that's it. On to the to I don't know, Eric. I don't know.
Okay, so on my side, I would say it's very important to still keep learning, right? Because we are living in an environment where we used to talk about AI everywhere, and a lot of people are afraid about losing their job because of AI. That's why it's very important, to still keep learning. For example, in my case, every time that I'm doing something and I have the impression that I'm not learning, you have just to question yourself about what's going on. It's very important to still, updated about what's going on about the tech industry. And one of the things that is really important, especially when it's come to land your first job, especially, is the fact that the most of the time when we are software engineer, we used to tend like the most important skills that I need is, to know how to code well and Android application, something like that. But unfortunately, the skills that is very, very important for a software engineer are not technical, right? Those are soft skills. So you need communication, you need time management, collaboration, and all those stuff. Because when you will join a team, you will start communicating with a lot of people. You will have to have some skill related to collaboration and communication, especially on this day when we used to work remotely. I think those skills also are very, very important. It's also important to prioritize them, to have those skills, not just focus on technical side, learning how to test application and all those stuff. It's also important to try to develop those soft skills that can help you to be integrated quite easily with your team, and in order to be able to, to produce great results. Back to you, Aaron.
Yes, Beatrice has already mentioned one of the key things I usually say. So, but when I look back, then I usually say read the documentation, because at times we are so obsessed in trying to make things work, and we forget to actually read the documentation, and it can save even tons of hours. So, for example, today I've spent like a whole day trying to read a whole documentation and trying to understand how to implement something before even you go to the actual implementation. That helps you in trying to understand the whole concept. Even if someone asks you why you are doing that approach, you are able to explain it. Because once you copy maybe code base from someone, or maybe somewhere, Stack Overflow, GitHub, or any tutorial that you can see or article, you don't understand the behind the scenes, and it comes to bite you at some points. Because if you don't understand what, maybe let's say you're adding something inside maybe your coroutines, and you don't understand why they're doing that approach, in case you've even faced issues or bugs, it's hard for you to even debug them, because you don't have that clear understanding. So it can even save you hours when you invest time to read the documentation. And secondly, you get like a clear understanding, especially nowadays. I think the documentation from the Google team, I think they've been really good from each and every library, so such that you can easily start with them and then know the concept of an API library, or even concept from start to end. So I think if I look back, I'll tell myself to read the documentation.
Thank you so much for all the insights that you have shared. I have another interesting question here. I think this one's pretty straight, but it's using an external library like Firebase for sort of like authentication and database. Is it advisable? I have an answer in my head for it, but you're the expert here. So, Eric, what do you think?
So I would say that it depends about what you are trying to do, right? For some application, using tools like Firebase and Firebase authentication can be really, really interesting for your businesses. Because, for example, when you have a small team, right, and you don't necessarily have a backend developer, someone who will create a backend side of your product, all the authentication stuff and secure all those stuff. I think in that particular case, right, using tools such as Firebase can save you a lot of time. And the biggest advantage of using tools such as Firebase is the fact that when you start your project, right, you don't need to pay anything. You can start with the free version of Firebase and Firebase authentication, and it can save you a lot of money. But as soon as your projects grow, I think maybe your business model change or the business logic of your product change. In that particular case, and if your team also grow, in that particular case, switching to your own backend services can be a great opportunity, because the most of the time company used to switch to their own backend as soon as they realize that there is some limitation with Firebase. But I would say is that for at the starting point, if you have a small team and you don't have backend engineer who would create the backend service of your application and all those authentication stuff, I think using Firebase can save you a lot of time, not only time but also a lot of money.
Also, to verify MVP, you want to launch a new app and you do not know if the users will take it or not for experiments. Instead of investing into an heavy backend stuff, you can use the free services. Yeah, it'll be good.
All right, thank you. I know we are almost running out of time, but I have two interesting questions that I want us to take as we close out on this session. The first one is when you want to build an application, you want to develop an application, how do you plan your time? Do you follow a specific order? What do you do? I want Aaron and Beatrice to take this, and then we'll take the final question.
Harry, you can go first.
Okay. I think normally in my day-to-day job, I think most of the tasks are planned by the PMs according to the priority. So I just have to pick up the task, and then if I finish that one and then go to the other one. So pretty much there is no, like, let's say, control over that, because what we have, I think we use Agile, and then over a period of time, there is like a specific amount of work that is supposed to be accomplished, and then all the tasks are ordered in priority. So you're supposed to complete this task, and then after that, complete the other one. But if I'm working maybe alone, what I used to do is maybe trying to break this task into the most the granular task as possible, like maybe breaking them into small components that are achievable. Because at times maybe you're trying to create like a whole dashboard page, and then it's complex, you don't know how to do it. Your mind gets even tired, or even can't be able to function properly. So I've always found breaking things into the small components very good. For example, the dashboard example, try to break even maybe creating the UI part, and then small parts, let's say this button, this card, and all that. As you try to accomplish these smaller things, I think the brain gets motivated, and then overall you'll find that you achieve like the whole big chunk of work that previously could seem like very impossible. So that always seemed to work. And even if I have like large epics or large pieces of work that I need to do, I always try to break them in small pieces so that I can be able to evaluate my progress, and maybe try to tick a few things. Maybe if at the end of the day, tick like 5 things and I'm happy, and then maybe that gets me motivated as well.
Beatrice.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, for me, I always remind people to remember to take a break. Yes, you do not have to build the old application on a single day. Breaking them into smaller tasks, as Aaron said, is very important. And celebrating small milestones is very useful, so that you do not burn yourself out. Yeah, so that you can also take time and plan. Yeah, just remember to take breaks. That's very important.
Okay, sorry. Final question, because the other tracks I've started already. I think the final question that I have is about getting jobs. So, what is your best advice on getting jobs as an Android developer? And we'll go from Eric to Beatrice to Aaron, and then we'll wrap up.
That is an interesting question. I think the most important thing is the part that you have to sell yourself. So I'm not saying that you have to be an expert in marketing or something like that. No, what I'm trying to say is you have just to show your work, right? You have just to show what you are capable of. So that's why it's really important to you can start sharing online on social media what you're capable of by, for example, on my case, I was able to land my first job when a couple of months after starting my blog post. You know, you used to write more regularly on Twitter, on LinkedIn. You can write a blog post about, what you doing. You can be super, super confident about something, but as soon as you don't share that, nobody will know that there is a best engineer, a good student there that is really talented about building Android application or something like that. And the most of the time on LinkedIn, recruiter used to reach out to you as soon as they see something that you did. It can be on LinkedIn or social media or something like that. The most of the time on my case, I didn't get the chance to have an interview by applying directly to the career page of a specific company. The most of the time, the tech recruiter reach out to me directly after seeing something that I've posted on LinkedIn or Twitter or something like that. I think that is really, really important to share what you know, right? Because people would not have an idea about what you are capable of if you don't share. You have just to pick up something that you are really comfortable in. So it can be publishing a blog post or creating a YouTube channel. You can do or speaking at conferences. So it's depend of something that is really important or it's make you comfortable. But it's really, really important to find a way to share with everyone else on social media. That's the advice I can give.
Also, another thing, yeah, we have so many tech communities. So join tech communities like this one and participate. Yes, of course, you get noticed. Your contribution, your good contribution, contributing to open source, of course, speaking, writing, you will be noticed. You may be, and also talk to people. You may be talking to a recruiter who can hire you. Yeah. So again, market yourself in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what Eric has said and Beatrice has said, I think has worked for me, especially the part where you post things and then people reach out to you for jobs or for opportunities. Maybe to add, I think the other thing is as you're applying for jobs, it can be, especially the first role, can be quite tedious and quite hectic. Uh, one thing is to do is don't sit down and then apply for a job and then relax. Try to build something as well. And for example, if you're working on apps, try to publish them and also try to share, as Eric is saying. That also helps you to gain like experience as you're trying to apply for jobs, because I think you don't have like a career break or you don't have like a period of 1 year where you're just searching for jobs and doing nothing in terms of your career. And it also helps you because if you go to like the interview panel and ask what have you done recently, you can also pull your app and then say, this is what I've done and XYZ. It gives you like talking points. And the other thing is also try to do mock interviews with your peers. If you can find someone, for example, if you've never done an interview, find someone who you know has that experience, try to do mock interviews and let them tell you like, hey, you can maybe polish this skill, maybe try to do XYZ. And it sort of helps you build up that confidence and helps you build up that story for you when you're going to interviews, because interviews are more, the more you do them, the more you get the experience. And the more you do the mock interviews, the more you are ready for doing the interviews and you don't sort of panic when you are asked a question and sort of those sort of situations.
Awesome. Awesome. So thank you everyone for joining today. I know that we've already spent past the time and there's no way we'll cover all the questions that we have on Android development in just a quick chat. But hopefully you've been able to get answers to get started. And you can definitely connect with our panelists, Eric, Aaron, Beatrice. They're always available to help. So you can connect with them on social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever social media network, and or GitHub for developers, and definitely they're able to help out. Please join in the next session. If you go to the website, you'll be able to join the next session. It's already live, and you can see. And I'll catch you on the other side. Thank you so much, Beatrice, Aaron, and Eric, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for having me as well.
Bye.